Hello, my name is Christopher, and you are listening to the first episode of the Transgender Genocide, a series of podcasts documenting discrimination that is taking place in the United States right now. This podcast is produced by Rhetoric Watch. We talk about the mechanisms behind who says things, why they say them, and who stands to gain the most when rhetoric runs its course. Since this is our first episode, let's talk a little bit about what rhetoric is and why you should care about it. Simply put, rhetoric is the art of convincing others. To elaborate a bit, it's the ways that people use the situations, culture, history, and personalities of people or groups to convince them of a particular topic. Rhetoric is important because it shapes the way that we, as the public, think about issues of government, economics, and culture. It shapes our experience and makes us perceive those around us. It is another word for communication, but it also includes an intent by the speaker to reach a certain goal for the audience. It can be things as small as, you asking your roommate to do chores, but it can be as large and impactful as mass scale genocides. So, the transgender genocide. Why are we calling this series that? That's the question that we're going to go into in today's first episode of this podcast. To sort of start us off, I kind of want to ask, everyone, what is genocide? Do you know what genocide is? Can you think of any famous examples of genocide? I think probably the first thing that'll come to your brain, when you think of a genocide, is probably the Nazi genocide of the Jewish people, during the Holocaust. That was a undeniable, horrific event. Uh, and so it's kind of shaped our perspective of what genocide is. It's this huge profile incident, and it's almost this weird like mythical creature, right? It almost exists in its own little bubble where people think, oh, well, genocide is, I mean, that's what genocide is. It's this horrible, horrible mass killing of a group of people for something that they don't control, right? And while that is genocide, and that is what genocide was, a lot of the times that sort of thing can, sort of blind people to, the symptoms of what caused genocide. Because, I mean, in Nazi Germany, things didn't just happen overnight. People didn't just all of a sudden start hating Jewish people and start killing them. That wasn't what happened. It wasn't just that, oh, a leader got into power who wanted to kill the Jewish people, and he convinced everyone else to do it too. That, I mean, it was way more complicated than that. And so I kind of wanted to go into a little bit of what genocide is. What are the risk factors for it? But I don't want to do it myself. I'm going to draw from a article written by Matthew Waits. He's a scholar for human rights at the University of Glasgow. So let's look a little bit about his article goes into the history of genocide. What is genocide? Like, how can we look at it from a historical lens? How can we experience the importance of genocide from a like knowledge standpoint? How can we define it in a way that is more than just, oh, it's just a large scale killing of people? Um, so the United States and a bunch of other countries grouped together in 1948 under the United Nations during something called the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And during that convention, during 1948, they defined genocide as deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So, what does that mean? Well, deliberately inflicting is the first thing that we should look at. It's on purpose. This isn't happening on accident. The Nazis did not kill the Jews on accident. It happened because they wanted to for a reason. There was a deliberate goal. Um, on the group. On the group is, I mean, pretty simple. There is a group of people that is being discriminated against. It is not it's not the whole population. It's not everyone. There is a subsection of people that are being targeted. And then conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. This is probably where the definition that they bring sort of diverts from the common perspective of what genocide is. It's, you're trying to bring about physical destruction. So is death a way of doing that? Absolutely. But it's, it can be much more than that. It can be, destroying somebody's culture. If you assimilate them into your group of people, you have effectively genocided that group of people, they no longer exist anymore. Their culture is gone. The people that they were are gone. They, when they have children, those children won't have that same culture anymore. They won't have anything to do with the people that they once came from. That is an effective form of genocide. But let's look at some more stuff that came out of that same conference. Um, it aims at the destruction of the central foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of deliberately annihilating the groups itself. So you are trying to destroy the things that make those groups able to exist. So let's say, let's say there was a group of people who every day they ate a specific fruit, right? And it was integral to their culture. It, had a spiritual meaning to them. If you were to go and destroy that foundation of them eating that fruit, right? And you were to go and burn down all the trees that produce that fruit, and now they can't have it anymore, you drive that species to extinction. For that group of people, you have effectively eliminated a core piece of their culture. And this could be exceptionally damaging to them. It could completely rewrite the people that they are. It's as fundamental to some people as their religion, right? This would be like, oh, if you're religious, if someone were to go and destroy your church, and they were to destroy every last bit of religious texts, they were to kill every single person, or isolate every single person who knows, you know, the stories of the Bible or anything like that, depending on your religion. Um, if you were to go around and destroy all that, you would be effectively attempting to get rid of that culture, and that is what genocide is. It is a destroying of a particular group. You have destroyed that religious group. You have destroyed that cultural group. That is what it is. Now, this is all done by early genocide scholar Raphael Lemkin. Now, he was back then. It was a lot of during the time there was a political movement, and it was very common to think of everything in terms of countries, right? To think of everything in terms of states and national groups. So, to think of things like to classify, the Jewish people as their own state or as their own cultural group. Um, but nowadays, people are, taking more of the most prominent uh, genocidal scholars are, they're looking at, okay, what is genocide able to target? Is it only able to target specific cultural groups, or can it target any group of people that could be destroyed? And more, it comes down to, well, it can honestly be any political, social, cultural, economic, biological, physical, religious, or moral group. Could come down to, it could be the group of people that people are attempting to genocide, right? That could, any of that is possible. So, you know, let's talk about some of the techniques that people use when they're trying to genocide people. Again, this is still drawing from that article from Matthew Waits. The any articles and any sources that I use will be in the description of this podcast. So if you are interested in any of this sort of thing and you want to look a little bit more into it, feel free. I encourage doing research on your own. I am someone who believes that people need to know about things, and so that's why I'm trying to take what I know and the sources that I have, and bring them forward to make people aware of what's happening. Why are people doing things? And what are the potential consequences of what people say? Because there are consequences to what people say. Just like if you were to insult your best friend and say something that crossed a line, you probably wouldn't be friends with them anymore. That's a very small example, but I mean, words have power. I don't think anyone would deny that words have power. And in order for any group of people to have power, they need to have words. So, looking at those words and then looking at the real life consequences of those words, I think is important. And that's what Rhetoric Watch is all about. That's what our podcast series are all about. They are about getting people to understand and recognize that the people who are speaking to them have goals. My goal in speaking to you is to educate you about things that you may not know about, bring awareness to things you may not know about, and also to have you challenge the things that you hear on a day-to-day basis, because people a lot of the times, they really love hearing things like, oh, I'm not part of this this large group of people. I'm different. I'm not part of the the masses. I think a lot of people really like that sort of feeling like they are in the know, that they are the people who are smarter than everyone else. But no one's really smarter than anyone else, right? Nobody is born with the ability to just be simply better than anyone else. And I think that that bears keeping in mind that we are all just people, and we are all very susceptible to having our lived experiences be used against us to convince us of a specific sort of thing, right? And we're all I mean, we're all animals. We are all people who are afraid, because before we needed to survive in the wilderness, we had to fight for things in a very physical sense, and there were real threats to our lives every day. There were real threats. And nowadays, we live in a society, especially those of us privileged enough to live in, you know, uh, more developed countries with more robust economies. We are privileged enough to live in a world where it's not that simple anymore. It's not, oh, someone's gonna kill me, right? It's there's a lot of things to be afraid of, obviously, but most of those things come from interacting with other people, and the interfacing of our emotions with the world around us. What people tell us that we should be scared of. What people say is important, maybe in a religious sense, in a moral sense, in a cultural sense, maybe in a political sense. These are all things that people want to tell us are important. And I think what bears keeping in mind is that every single person is just a human, and there are very few people who deliberately want to hurt other people. There are a lot of people who are hurt, and a lot of people who don't know how to deal with that hurt that they have. Um, but I think that empathizing with those people who are hurting and trying to extend a hand towards them is always going to be better than hating them. And I think that a lot of the times choosing not to extend a hand can lead to things like we are going to talk about. So let me get back on topic here. So again, we're going to talk about some techniques of genocide. This is again part of the Matthew Waits article that you can read down in the description. So let's talk about the techniques of genocide. They are broken down into sort of similar groups to the groups of people that can be, genocided against: political factors, social factors, cultural factors, economic factors, biological factors, physical factors, religious and moral factors. So let's go into some examples. So one physical sort of technique of genocide could be the confiscation of property. So a very famous example is that a lot of Jews were visibly forced out of their homes in Poland during the uh, Nazi genocide of the Jews. The dissolution of political parties slash ideologies. So if a group of people stop being acceptable, that can be a warning sign that something's happening, that somebody is attempting to eradicate that group of people. Legal changes. Are there a bunch of laws that are being passed that are only targeting a specific group of people? This happened in Nazi Germany even before, you know, right at the beginning of when Hitler came into power, before the party started massacring all the people. There were a ton of laws that got passed, and they started out very small, but they ramped up as people became more and more accepting of what the Nazis were saying. people started being more and more okay with these legal changes that were discriminatory against the Jewish people and allowed the German government at the time a significantly higher degree of control over that specific group of people. Then control of cultural activities. This would be things like destroying religious spaces. Again, to use the example, the very famous example of the Nazis, they would destroy the synagogues of the Jews. This was a way to control these people's cultural identities, to make sure that these people could not have communities, and drive them sort of into despair, and made them again easier to control and easier to get rid of. Another one could be the prohibition of marriages, the prohibition of cultural like activities that would allow people to get closer together. Things, obviously like marriage. If you say, oh well, I'm not going to allow you to marry you, essentially you are stopping two people, or maybe in a polyamorous society more than two people, from becoming legally recognized as people who are going to spend a lot of time together. And if you're affording that benefit to other people, it is a form of discrimination, and it can dramatically impact the way that those people think about themselves and other people, and it can make people feel unwelcome in their society. And it's another tool to make people feel discomforted. They feel unrest. And that's really a ton of, and I mean, I can't cover everything that people would do in order to create genocide. um but I can cover a huge component of genocide, and that is rhetoric. So we talked a little bit about at the very start of the podcast. Okay, what is rhetoric? Rhetoric is sort of this art of convincing people. Well, what do you need to convince people of? And so let's say you're the Nazi party. If you're the Nazi party and your goal is to eliminate Jews, but you have a populace that doesn't necessarily hate Jewish people, okay, well then, what do they hate? That's the question you need to first ask yourself. And you might say, they hate people who are predators. They hate people who are going to hurt children, right? And so then what do? You draw a line between the Jewish people and perverts, right? And you take those two groups of people, and you call the Jewish people pedophiles. And if you do that, then all of a sudden, these people who didn't really have a stake in the game, who didn't really care about Jewish people and what they do, right, and who might react significantly adversely if you were to, do some horrible stuff like imprison them, people will stop asking those questions if they now believe, oh, this group of people are perverts, right? And those are the ways that people use rhetoric to get people to like or dislike certain groups of people. It's huge, and honestly, it starts really small. Stereotyping is a very small thing. It doesn't have to start as this huge thing. It's just a small thing. It can be like, oh, XYZ group of people, they're always doing this, right? You hear it a ton of times when people are being, racist, or, quote unquote casually racist, which just means racism without any intent of hurting people, but it's still racism, by the way. But when people are being, racist, they might say something like, "Oh, Asian people are so, they love math so much," right? And that is exceptionally, racist. It's, you're profiling an entire group of people into something that is just not true. Like, that's just not, people don't actually, not all Asians are just ridiculously obsessed with math, right? However, that is, those sorts of stereotypes, it doesn't really take much for somebody to be like, oh, all Asians love math, which, loving math isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's weird to profile an entire group of people like that, but if I said, oh, you love math, I'm not really insulting you. But it's not hard to then be like, oh, they're all nerds, they're all, asocial, they're all perfectionists to a huge T. They all are, and then it can go even worse. Like, it can be like, oh, they're all conniving, they're all, hateful. And these are all things where you take it just one step and you say, well, somebody's smart, no, they're a nerd, right? It's a one very small step. And then you take that step from, oh, they're a nerd to, oh, they're, they're snobby. They're snobby. They're snobby about how intelligent they are. And then you take that snobby and you say, oh, they're kind of assholes. They're kind of jerks. And then you go, oh, well, they're conniving. They're attempting to use their smarts to do something to hurt you, right? They're doing things intentionally to mess up your life. Uh, and you notice how something as in like technically innocent as, oh, they can do math it well, can really quickly turn into something that is, you know extremely discriminatory. If somebody came out the gate and they swung out with, oh, this whole group of people, they're evil and conniving, you might not believe them. But if somebody were to walk you through each one of these steps in a way that reflected your lived experiences, then it can quite quickly become a thing where you find it easy to believe. Um, a really good example of a place where this can happen is definitely in the church, right? If you've grown up your whole life believing in a moral system, right? Let's say you go to church every day, or every week, you're a Christian, and you believe in Jesus, right? And you believe in the scriptures, and you believe in God. If you, you know, have spent your whole life listening to homilies about, okay, what is good, what is bad, what is sinful, what is right, right? And then somebody goes, okay, well, being, homosexual is a sin. If somebody were to come up to you and say, oh, I don't think being homosexual is okay, right? And you had never had the experience of, being religious whatsoever, then you're gonna be, depending on how you grew up, right? If there's a bunch of people around you who are homosexual and you see them every single day, you're obviously not going to perceive that as evil. No, you're not going to perceive the things that exist around you as these horrible, horrible things. Now, if you grew up in a community where that wasn't very common, you might find it weird, right? If you find something weird, it's a lot easier for people to convince you to be afraid of it. Because if you don't know what it is, you don't have any preconceptions about it. If you grew up right next to a gay couple who were super nice to you, it would be really difficult for you to believe, oh, these people are evil. But if you grew up, in a community where none of those people were around, and then you met them and they acted in a different way than you expected, and no one had ever acted like that before, all of a sudden it's a lot easier for you to be like, hmm, well, they're weird, and maybe, yeah, maybe that's not okay. Because things that are different are, you know, unsettling. People get scared of things that aren't within their comfort zone. You can be scared to go and speak at a public speaking event. You can be scared to play a sport you've never played before because you don't know what those things entail. And then when you see what they do, you might be like, oh wow, that sport's super dangerous. Like, I can't believe that they just let people tackle each other in football, right? And it's things like that that people do that with people. But the consequence is a lot different, right? If I go and I say, oh, I don't like football because there's a bunch of people tackling each other and they're going to get hurt, and I can't believe people let this be a sport. It's crazy and scary and not okay, right? The consequence of doing that is that you don't play football. And some people look at you like maybe that your choice to not play football is a little strange, right? But the consequence of you saying, I don't like gay people and I think that being gay is wrong, what's the consequence of that? Maybe nothing if you're in a group of people that where there are no gay people. But let's say one of your best friends is gay and he hasn't told you. What are you gonna do? Like, who? That would be like if he came up to you and said, "Hey, sorry, you can't, like, being straight is just so wrong and it's terrifying." You would look at him and be like, "What? That's just like what I'm interested in. That's who I like. I don't control that. That's not a thing that I get to choose. I find what I find attractive attractive." And I think, for those people who grow up and then they have people say to them, this is not okay. The person that you are is not okay. Or a couple that's just living and having fun, being told, hey, you're going to hell because of the choices that you're making right now. Well, I'm pretty sure you can see how that can be a lot more damaging than not playing a football. It can make people feel alienated from their communities. It can make people feel like they can't be themselves. It can make people go into marriages that they will never be happy in. It can make people go into relationships where they will constantly feel unhappy. It dooms people into feeling trapped and lost without anywhere to go to. And that's the consequences of acting purely on fear. But it's easy. It is really easy to do. And so, because of that, people use it to scare you, right? That people use rhetoric to scare you. Let's say I'm a politician and I would like to build a new police academy. I want to build a police academy and I want to train police forces. And why do I want to do it? I want to do it so that I can, you know, have a tighter hold over the youth community because they've been a little rambunctious, right? But I go to a city hall meeting, and I sit down and I talk to people and I say, hey, our youth have been out later than I'd like. I want to have a new police academy. I want to train a whole bunch of new policemen so we can send them out on the streets and make sure young people aren't out. And then I get laughed off the city council because people go, "Oh no, nobody cares about that, right? Like they're out until 10 instead of 9. It's fine. Nobody cares." Um, and so now I'm in a pickle. I can't build the thing I wanted to build. So I go back to the drawing board. Okay, how can I convince people? How can I make them believe me? How can I make them want to build this police academy? And I know that I'm in a community that is full of a bunch of people who are exceptionally religious. And I know that these groups of people are all from a religious group that strongly believes that homosexuality is a sin. And I know that they believe that if their teens get tied up in that sort of thing, that their teens will go to hell. And that they love their teens very much and they don't want to send them into, eternal damnation. All right, so what do I do? Well, I go back to that meeting and I say, well, listen, first, when I was talking about those teens being out so late, I didn't want to impose on our teens. I believe that freedom for teens is a great thing. But recently, I've been seeing the emergence of some homosexual groups in our community that are targeting teens late at night, and at this point, it's becoming a little unsafe. There's these groups of homosexual predators that are out at night and in our community, and we've seen it. We've seen it happen, and we need you to help stop these people. And so, can you please help us build this police academy? Because this is going to help us get what we want. This is going to help us protect the morality, the nature, and the culture of our citizens and keep them from falling into hell's grasps. Well, all of a sudden, to that group of people, my proposal and my goal, which hasn't changed, I still want the teens off the streets earlier. All of a sudden, it sounds a lot more interesting to them because they have a tie in. They have something that they believe that being gay is fundamentally going to send you to eternal damnation. That's what they believe. And so, by me telling them, hey, your kids are in danger of this, all of a sudden I can accomplish my political goal of building a new police station and getting more funding for the police a lot easier. Because people now believe me. People believe in what I'm saying. Eh, and I feel like that segues very nicely into this idea of genocide in a way of mental harm. Um, the Genocide Convention was another meeting, sort of to define what genocide was and talk about issues at the time, and two very prominent members of the genocide studies scholastic community, Spivey and Robinson. both argued that the U.S. Ex-gay movement has genocidal intentions for homosexual people, as well as the rhetoric that surrounds those issues. So let's go into that a little bit. So, what is the U.S. Ex-gay movement? Well, it's the idea that there are people out there who were gay and they're no longer gay, and now they want to talk to people about their experiences when they were gay, why they were gay, and why they changed back, and why it's wrong to be gay, right? Uh, and a lot of it is this sort of thing of, I thought I was fundamentally gay, but I'm not, right? It turns out that I was straight this whole time, and I was choosing to be gay just as like a fad. And it turns out that all this stuff was sort of just society telling me that I should. And, and it made me really unhappy. And now that I'm in a heterosexual relationship, I feel so much better. And that's what the US X gay movement is. It is this fundamental, like, sort of dismissal of a lot of what people who actually are homosexual would say about themselves. They would be like, well, it's not a choice. It's something that I myself am. I was born in the same way that you were born heterosexual. I was born homosexual, and I find people of the same gender as me very attractive. I mean, that's what they would say about themselves. And the ex-gay movement basically says, oh, well, no, that's actually not what's happening. You actually do have the choice, and you're choosing this because society has brainwashed you, right? You're choosing this because of society, not because of yourself. And in doing so, it dismisses who these people are. It basically says, no, you don't know about yourself. I know about you. And I need to help you. I need to save you, right? And the X gay movement is very intertwined with a lot of very hardcore religious groups that believe that homosexuality is wrong. And they say, oh, what you need in life is God. You don't need, opposite sex relationships. And basically, what all of this rhetoric does, this dismissal of who these people are, is, I mean, it eliminates them, right? The goal is to get rid of gay people and to basically convince them all that no, they are heterosexual. No, they are making this choice. No, they are not real, and the feelings that they have for other people are just them being brainwashed, right? And the ultimate goal of the ex-gay movement would be that all gay people no longer have feelings for other gay people, and all of a sudden, being gay is just eliminated. And that's what genocide is. Like we were saying, it's the elimination of a group of people, and that would do it. That would do it. Another really core part of genocide is the taking of history and making it into something that you want it to be. So, how do we do this? Well, to go back to our Nazis argument, uh, the Nazis used this congestion of collective memory all the time. They were saying, "Oh, well, let's look at our country's economic downturn. Who is in charge of our banks? Who's hurting us? Who is the reason why we're all under the system of hyperinflation? Why none of us have any money? Why our economy is struggling so hard? What is the reason for all this?" And they were very easily able to take this idea that because there were a group of people who were Jewish who were bankers, they were able to say, "Oh, let's look at these Jewish people. They are in control of the banks. That means that they're in control of the economy," which is not how it works at all. But it's a pretty easy jump to make if you're just somebody who doesn't really know too much about the economy. They go, "Oh, banks, economy, yeah, that makes sense." And they go, "Well, they're in charge of your banks, so they're in charge of your economy. And the reason that you have to wipe you have to use money as toilet paper is because of these people. They are destroying your economy." And I mean, what does that do? It makes people angry. It makes people upset. They go, "Oh, you're the one who hurt us," and it doesn't take into account the actual history. It doesn't take into account what actually happened. It's just using things that everyone knows about. The fact that there were some people who were bankers who were Jewish, and the fact that money was awful in the Weimar Republic, and hyperinflation was a real thing. People were There was so much money being printed, and the value of things was changing within literal minutes because of how much inflation happened, and money would lose its value hourly. People really, really wanted a reason for why all this stuff was happening. And so it was really easy for public officials to suggest to them, hey, what if it's the Jewish people? What if it's them and their banks connected to the economy? Right? What if they're the ones driving this inflation and destroying our economy? And it worked. It worked. It made a lot of people very, very upset. If somebody was responsible for destroying your money and destroying your livelihood, you would also be very upset. It was a deliberate strategy to make people hate a group of people in order to install a greater sense of control for the central government, because the Weimar Republic was not a dictatorship. So how do you install a dictatorship in a place that doesn't have a dictatorship? Well, you need people to agree to be controlled. How do you get people to agree to give up their freedom? It's hard. It's hard to do. How do you do it? Well, what if you convince them that there's an existential threat? A threat that is harming them, that is destroying their economy, that is, you know, harming, their culture, that is a pervert, that are going to hurt their kids. What if you convince people that there's some sort of existential threat that's that big? And then you put a figurehead who says, or maybe not even a figurehead, maybe a real leader who goes up and says, I can fix this problem. I can get rid of the people who are doing this to you, the people who are perverted and gross and creepy, the people who are, their culture is ravaging us, the people who are stealing your money and charging you ridiculous interest rates, the people who have done everything to harm this country and its people, who are deliberately working to undermine the spirit of the good German citizen, right? That's what these people said. And if somebody comes along who says that they can fix all of that, people are going to vote for them. People are going to believe in them. And if that person says, well, I need this, people will let that happen. If they then say, oh, well, that's not enough, I need more. It's not enough for me to just be able to, kick them out of business. I need to be able to imprison them because of what they're doing. And that will save you. People will let that happen. And then if they go another step further and they say, well, this isn't enough, these people need to die because that's the only way we can save you from them, people will let that happen because they firmly believe that that's what is causing their problems, because that's what the public officials made them believe. That is the scope of rhetoric. That is what rhetoric can do. A simple thing like being like, oh, everyone is like this. Like this group of people, oh, they're all like this. It can go from a tiny, tiny little spark to a huge, huge issue that eventually makes people die. And that's what genocide studies is. It is looking at how do we predict when these sorts of things are going to happen? How do we know when people are going to start to be hurt because of something that they don't control, or their culture, or their ideology, their religion? How do we know? And I think a good indicator is looking at the history of the past, like we've just been doing, and looking at, well, what did people do to convince people back then? And if similar tactics are being used now, then the question is, well, does that mean that it's happening now? So I'd like to start to transition into sort of a examination of modern U.S. history. We've kind of got a better grasp of what genocide is. It's this elimination of a group of people, and maybe not in a physical sense, maybe not in a genuine killing sense, but maybe just in a way of getting rid of their way of life, of getting rid of who they are. So the title of this episode, the transgender genocide. You know, it's going to be the title of all of these episodes as we look at discrimination against transgender people. Why are we calling it that? Well, we've got the genocide part down. The attempt to get rid of a group of people. Well, is that happening right now? Are trans people being targeted? Are people specifically trying to get rid of trans people? The answer is yes. The answer is 100% yes. It's for sure yes. And how can I convince you of that? Well, let me read you some talking points from a very famous conservative rhetorician. He might call himself a political commentator. His name is Matt Walsh. Every single thing I'm going to read out to you right now is from his Twitter page. I'm going to link his Twitter page down below. And you can click onto it and can scroll down his feed, and I promise you every single thing here is going to be in there. And it might be scary. It might be. Well, actually, this first thing is actually not from the Matt Walsh's Twitter page. There is another link in the description below, and it is sort of this interview talking about Michael Knowles and his speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC. So he's talking about being transgender here. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. Entirely. The whole preposterous ideology. Now, when Michael Knowles said this, the crowd cheered. They cheered, hearing transgenderism must be eradicated from public life. And, I mean, I kind of want to break down this whole, group of words. Because, I mean, maybe you heard that group of words and were like, whoa, that's crazy. And maybe you heard that group of words and were like, well, I mean, I don't hear where he's calling for genocide. I don't see where that is. Well, let's start here. If it is false, it implies right away that being transgender is false. It's just not real. He immediately dismisses the legitimacy of an entire group of people. And that can be scary. I mean that is already a warning sign for genocide. When you're trying to get rid of a group of people in any way, if you're trying to get rid of their legitimacy, if you're trying to get rid of who they are, if you're trying to say, oh, they're not real or they're false, I mean, that's a warning sign, right? It doesn't mean that there is genocide. It just means that there's a warning. It's okay. He has now said that transgender people are false. Then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion. So for the good of society. So he's saying that what he's saying is important for all of society. He's saying for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion. He is now telling his audience, basically, oh, I care about transgender people. They're just not actually transgender. But I care about them. They're poor people. They've fallen prey. They've fallen prey to this confusion. This is just all a huge confused mess. He's now making these people feel like they're crazy. He's basically saying, these people are crazy. They've fallen prey to this societal movement, this transgenderism, which is literally the next word that he says. Instead of saying, a transgender person, being transgender, he says transgenderism. He uses the word ism. But ism generally means like a theory or like a ideology. He's basically, and he literally in the next sentence, the next part of the sentence, calls it a preposterous ideology. An ideology is an intellectual belief system that is imposed upon reality. It's not an actual, inherent thing. An identity would be something that is inherent. So, saying, I identify as, I identify as a male, or I identify as, someone who is X race. That would be an identity. It's something that is inherent to you. By calling being transgender an ideology, he's basically dismissing the fact that these people's identities are of a gender that is different than their sex assigned at birth. He completely says, and then he goes on to say, it must be eradicated from public life entirely. Basically saying that being transgender should not be allowed in public life. And I mean, that speech, that talking point, that is genocidal. It is asking for people to get rid of a group of people based on their culture, based on the people that they are. And what really concerns a lot of people is not so much these words, because there are people who believe in genociding a whole variety of groups of people. No, the thing that's concerning most, the thing that would make genocidal study scholars become nervous, is this idea that the crowd heard the words and they cheered. Because that means that these group of people, they believe what he's saying. They believe that what he's saying is necessary. So he's not just saying these things with no audience. No, there's an audience, and there's a group of people that genuinely believes what he's saying. Now, let's just change the word transgenderism to white people. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, white people must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology. Now imagine if I said that. Imagine if somebody prominent said that and a whole group of people cheered, right? And, let's say I'm a white person and I hear this. Oh, these people don't want me in public life. They think I'm false. They think I'm confused. They, they think that my identity is an ideology, that it's something that I'm coming up with, that I'm imposing on reality. And that's scary for me. But is it just words? Is it just words? No. Hatred and fear of transgender people for political gain is actually being enacted into law around the country. And remember, that was one of our warning signs of genocide back in the techniques of genocide. Legal changes. It's a big thing. Well, there are laws being passed around transgender people. Let's talk about the state of Florida. The state of Florida is attempting to ban colleges from having a gender studies major or minor, and they want to expand the Don't Say Gay bill, which already bans just classroom discussion of gender identity or sexual orientation through third grade. They want to get rid of all discussion of gender identity or sexual orientation through the 8th grade. Now, I don't know about you, but I had a health class in the 5th grade. And in that 5th grade health class, I learned about people being attracted to other people and people wanting to do things with other people. And I learned what, intercourse was. I learned that in 5th grade. And I don't think that was a bad time for me to learn that. That was a time when I didn't know about that sort of thing. But if I would have found myself in a situation where somebody was attempting to prey on me or use my lack of knowledge against me, if I hadn't have been in that class, I wouldn't have known what they were trying to do, and I wouldn't have known what to say or how to get out of it. And because education gives people the power to know what's happening. If you don't know how to do your taxes and all of a sudden you find yourself, you've accidentally avoided taxes, and all of a sudden now the IRS is at your doorstep, if I would have educated you about taxes, you would have been able to prevent this from happening, right? And you would have never been under threat of, going into bankruptcy. it's the same thing with sexual predators and you know just sex in general. If you know about it, you're able to protect yourself, make informed decisions and safe decisions. And I think that is the point of talking about those sorts of things. When you don't let people even talk about who they're interested in, because I mean there are plenty. I mean, I don't know if any of you have been through middle school, but most of you probably have. There are plenty of people who date during middle school, who have crushes and flirt, and I mean it's the time when people learn, you know, what are you interested in? What makes you you? What what do you enjoy about other people? And I mean, this bill would ban any discussion of gender identity or sexual orientation. So I can't say that I'm interested in, because sexual orientation doesn't mean sex. It can mean kissing someone, right? I'm interested in kissing girls. I'm interested in kissing guys. That's what sexual orientation is. It's just who you're interested in being intimate with in any way. It could even mean holding hands, right? If that's something that you feel is emotionally significant to you, emotionally intimate. And I don't think there's anyone out here saying, "Oh, I don't want eighth graders holding hands." And I think that banning that discussion and banning people from even learning about different groups of people, it can make people have a difficult time understanding themselves. And that can drive all sorts of different things. It can drive depression, anxiety. It can drive people to feel like they don't have a place in society, and that can be really dangerous. Let's move on from Florida. Let's talk about the fact that only 21 states prohibit gender identity discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations under state law. That means that in every other state except those 21 states, transgender people can be discriminated against in employment, housing, and public accommodations. People can be denied leases. People can be denied jobs. And people can be denied healthcare and public transportation and food stamps. These are all real things that people can be denied simply because they're transgender. And what happens if you're transgender and all of a sudden you can't have a job? You can't find a place to live, and all of a sudden you can't use any public facilities. Well, your quality of life is going to decrease significantly, and it's going to make it really difficult for you to live. Maybe you stop having money, and now you can't afford the things that make you feel less gender dysphoric, the things that make you look the way you want to look. And all of a sudden, you've been forcibly detransitioned. Those sorts of laws can effectively genocide you because, like, genocide an entire group of people because that group of people simply can't exist anymore in that state because of the laws that would be passed. Now, are there laws that specifically target employment, housing, public accommodations right now? Arguable, but there are plenty of states in which those laws could be passed without any sort of revising to, you know, the constitution of each individual state at all. But if we, step a little bit beyond like the actual law, of which there are a ton. Um, there is a very fantastic website that sort of goes into how many laws transgender people have had passed against them. Let me see if I can quick find it. Um, uh, I'm actually gonna move on from there because we've got more to talk about. But in our next episode, that's something you can look forward to. I will be going over every single law that is currently passed in the United States. I believe that there are around 71 laws that have already been passed that are explicitly anti trans laws that limit what they can do. I know for a fact that there are things around bathrooms, around sports, and around education. I know for a fact that there are laws in all three of those areas, and I assume that there are laws in more, but I will do more research so that I can give you a more coherent look at what that is in our next episode. Um, let's talk a little bit about the social factors behind transgenderism. Or behind being transgender. Sorry. A lot of the times, people who are transgender, they can be rejected. They can feel rejected. They can feel discriminated against. People's families often will kick them out of the house or say, "Oh no, you're still my son," to somebody who's transitioned to female, or "Oh, you're still my daughter," right? And those things can really hurt these people who are really trying to feel more like themselves. And if you grew up with a group of people who you believed were your allies in every way, or who raised you and who you feel like deeply indebted to, and all of a sudden these group of people is just saying, "Oh, sorry, you don't exist the way that you think you exist," uh, it hurts, and it can cause really bad depression. And I mean, in a lot of educational spaces, these people can't represent themselves in the way that they want to without being, made fun of by classmates or discriminated against in grading by teachers. I mean, these are real things. And again, if you want to look a little bit more at what's happening with that, I have sources down below in the description to sort of make you able to understand what these people are going through. Data suggests that transgender people face high rates of poverty, housing insecurity. These limit their ability to leave situations where they're exposed to violence. If somebody beats them up or is, in an abusive relationship with them, they can't just move because they're too poor. They have to stay where they are, or they can't find any other places to go. They also can't receive gender affirming healthcare and identification documents. Not having a document that says, "Oh, if I pull out my driver's license and it says, 'Oh, look, I'm a female,' if I pull it out and it says, 'Oh, I'm a male,' even though I am a transgender person who's transitioned male to female, then the group of people that are female, like that person who is female, who feels female, who is transgender, who truly is a woman, all of a sudden the people can be like, 'Oh, well, look at your card. Oh, well, look at your identification document. Look at your birth certificate. What does it say?'" And that heightens the risk of violence. People can perceive them as transgender, and they will target them in public spaces. And doing that will dramatically decrease people's mental health, and it can make them feel like they don't want to be transgender. It can make them not talk about who they are and their feelings, right? And that can really, really hurt people. So let's finally loop back around to Matt Walsh. Again, his Twitter feed down in the description. Listen to the demon and believe what it says. These are the true beliefs of the ideology speaking through the mouth of its human host. They want to expose children to perversion in the name of progress. So listen to the demon. So immediately calling somebody who is transgender a demon. These are the true beliefs of the ideology speaking through the mouth of its human host. Basically, saying that being transgender is some sort of foreign invader, almost an alien of sorts, that is able to control people. Basically, saying that, "Oh, these people are puppets. These people are brainwashed." They want to expose children to perversion. They deliberately call transgender people perverts, or what they are as being perverted. Now, what does that sound like to you? Because to me, it sounds a lot like Nazi rhetoric back during the time of World War II. It's the same tactic. Let's move on to the next quote. Gender theory ideologues credentialed to perform surgeries is a horror plot. Oregon's governor is likely to sign into law a bill that allows for minors as young as 15 to get sterilization procedures. Sterilization procedures. That's a start. So calling it a sterilization procedure instead of gender affirming healthcare basically takes away these people's choice to be the person that they want to be, and calls it a horror plot. Says, oh well, these people can't have kids. How many cisgender people, people who aren't transgender, do you know who just straight up don't want to have kids, or who've gotten a vasectomy, who've gotten their tubes tied? That is also a sterilization procedure. But I don't think anyone is campaigning against vasectomies. So then why are these people so upset about people making a choice to be more representative of who they feel they are inside? It's a question that you should ask yourself. Tuck friendly bathing suits were only for adults. Look at where it's an ad on Twitter. Sari P. Perry found them in the kids/teen area of the store, right next to the child mannequins. Sizing for teens is not always different from adults. So these are swimsuits that were found in Target. There was a huge outrage around Target and their support of transgender individuals by stocking clothing that was, friendly. Uh, Target released a statement saying, "Oh, this stuff is only for adults," and somebody found uh, those things right next to the teen area. So this tweet is about that, and you know these, they're in this tweet. It doesn't ever explicitly say it, but it's trying to imply that transgender people are attempting to brainwash children, or attempting to force children into being a certain way. Um, but there is real evidence to suggest that children as young as 4 years old can experience lifetime gender dysphoria, like serious long-term lifetime gender dysphoria, where they are just transgender. They know from a very young age that they're transgender, and for those children, you know, they will experience horrible, horrible depression and anxiety because they can never look the way that they want to look. And so the question is, I mean, you know, argument about kids notwithstanding, I mean, that's your own, like, your own thought. You can have your own thoughts around that. My personal thoughts are that children are humans as well as we. We're all humans. And I think that every human has a right to be respected, and treated as though they are intelligent beings. And I think that calling children unable to exist without parental influence is dangerous. It's a dangerous, it's dangerous to say, oh, parents should be able to do everything with a child's life, because there are a ton of abusive parents. There are a ton of parents who will genuinely harm their child's life, the rest of their life. They will harm the way that they interact with people. They will harm their understanding of the world around them because of the way that they interact with children. So a parent is not necessarily a safe space for a child. I mean, there's a reason why child protective services exist, um, even though they are criminally underfunded. So I guess my point with this particular tweet is just, especially for teenagers, it's okay if there are quote unquote tuck friendly bathing suits, if that's what's going to make that person feel the most comfortable. At the end of the day, it's only clothes. It should not be criminal to wear clothes that make you feel happy with the way that you look. I mean, that's why half of the clothes on the market exist. It shouldn't be different for trans people than it is for normal people, cisgender people. Even though cisgender people are a large majority, um, but transgender people are just as normal and just as valid as cisgender people. So let me quick read the next quote. And the reason I said regular people or normal people is because of this next quote. Regular people care greatly about the society their children are inheriting. That's a concern that cuts to the deepest part of their soul. They are terrified that their children will be destroyed by our degenerate culture. If you think that these issues are a quote distraction, you're a moron. Plain and simple, you can't be taken seriously. Now, this distraction he's talking about is somebody else being like, well, hey, somebody else on Twitter was like, hey, all this transgender like rhetoric is a distraction from real politics and real political issues. And this was a response on Matt Walsh's Twitter feed. Quote, regular people. So assume basically saying if you don't care about this stuff, you're not regular, you're not normal. Which immediately makes people feel like, oh well, I want to be normal, I want to be part of the in group. And that convinces people to like be more on your side. They're worried about the society their children are inheriting. He's basically talking about, oh, think about the kids. That's a concern that cuts to the deepest parts of their soul. They are terrified that their children will be destroyed by our degenerate culture, specifically calling being transgender degenerate. Let's move on to the next one. Like I said, it's a fetish. We have a radically reorganized society for these people just to accommodate their fetish. That's what so much of this is about. They get a sexual thrill out of forcing everyone to play along. This is just flat out saying that it is, that being transgender is a fetish. That's just not true. You can just, if you want to know about that, if you think that that's true, and you want to know, hey, how can I find a thing that like this isn't a fetish? There are a million studies out there. Just look up, is being transgender a fetish? And I promise you, it will not. Like you will find, go on Google Scholar or any other sort of scholarly article website, look it up. You will find a million studies refuting that. It is not sexual in nature whatsoever. In fact, gender identity has got nothing to do with sexual orientation whatsoever. Somebody can be gay or straight if they're transgender. But that's what Matt Walsh is saying. He's calling it a fetish, which is exactly what, and he's calling them. He's saying that they get quote a sexual thrill. If that doesn't mirror Nazi rhetoric around Jewish people, I don't know what does. Then there's another tweet. There are two main ingredients required for creating a trans kid. One, a weak or absent father, or two, a mentally ill or abusive mother. Only one of these is necessary, but both ensures it. Yeah, he's just saying that the only way that somebody could be trans is if they have a quote weak or absent father or a mentally ill or abusive mother. These are like there are so many problems with this tweet that it's kind of hard to get into. But a weak or absent father, first of all, playing into that gender stereotype, oh well, father needs to be strong, right? An absent father, okay, their father's not around, which is obviously a big deal and can really hurt children as they grow up if their father's not around. Or quote, a mentally ill or abusive mother. So someone who's literally either needs to seek mental help or is a horrible person who is harming their child actively. He's saying that that's every single trans person has that. And that's, first of all, that's crazy. I'm sure you can find a million examples that trans people themselves will talk to you about. And they will say, hey, no, I had an awesome father. I had an awesome mother. And they are extremely supportive of me, right? They both love and care about me a lot. And I'm sure that you could find trans people who would say, oh, my parents don't support me at all. But my father is very stereotypically strong. And my mother isn't really mentally ill or abusive. She's just sort of mostly quiet, right? There are a million ways that you can take this tweet, but the main thing is that they are setting up the parents as the failures that have created trans children. In that way, they make people who are parents, who have trans kids, who aren't really sure about what that means, they can make those people feel really, really bad about themselves. They can feel really, really guilty because they're like, oh, am I weak? Am I absent? Am I mentally ill? Am I abusive? Right? And then for the people who aren't trans and don't have a trans kid, uh, it makes those people go, oh, well, if this person's trans, it's not their fault. It's the fault of their parents who are weak, absent, mentally ill, abusive. I mean, that's what they're saying, right? It's dangerous. Then this last tweet I want to go over is trans activists have gotten everything they want by crying hysterically and using emotional manipulation. They are now running into a faction of the right that doesn't give a shit about their theatrics or their feelings. First of all, calls their feelings theatrics, because people can't have feelings. Uh, and they call people in emotional distress emotionally manipulative, which, I'm sure that if you were crying because, you couldn't get a job, or you were crying because you were fired or yelled at by a customer because of something that you genuinely believe is who you are, you know, because that is what they are. If people have a right to decide what they are, I get to decide who I am. You get to decide who you are, right? Nobody gets to say what your personality is or who you are inside because that's your choice. And it's also trans people's choice, right? But they're saying, oh, they're emotionally manipulative. They've chosen to manipulate you. In our next episode, I kind of want to lay down what we're going to do. Because this has all been really heavy. There's a lot of big, like, really negative words that are associated with this. We're gonna ask in our next episode, why are they using these words? What do they stand to gain by using this genocidal language? Because I think by the end of this episode, we should all understand, yeah, this stuff is genocidal. This does target a group of people, and it does seek to have that group of people not exist anymore. So why do they want to genocide them? And it's not just why from a surface level, like, oh, well, they're predators. Oh, well, they're, you know, attempting to, open the sports barrier or whatever. Let's not look at it from a surface level. Let's look at it from a deeper level. And from that deeper level, we're going to find answers. So, next episode, we're going to look at why. Why do people do this? Then we're going to look at conversion therapy. We're going to look at, okay, what is conversion therapy? What happens with conversion therapy? Is conversion therapy safe? And we're going to talk about the 10 stages of genocide. And we're going to go in depth, even further, into what is happening with transgender people today. How is that going to, how can we further prove that these trans people are going through some of the early stages of genocide? And then lastly, we're going to go over the actual legal laws that have been placed to restrict trans people's rights. Anyways, I'd like to thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. Next week, we should have another episode out. It may be on another episode of the Transgender Genocide. It may not be. Thank you so much for listening. Again, this has been Christopher. I am with Rhetoric Watch, and this has been the first episode of the Transgender Genocide.